единственная партия.
The leader of what was then the Soviet Union launches another attack on Western powers in the General Assembly, head of a communist empire striving to be a dominant power, striding ahead in the space race, developing an overwhelming stockpile of nuclear weapons, and as part of Cold War expansion sending troops into Afghanistan. But the strength of Afghan resistance undermined the Soviet myth of unmatchable power and depleted diminishing state coffers. A new US president and his futuristic Star Wars missile defense system further challenged the Soviets to increase their military spending. He was joined by a trusted ally who gave permission for US cruise missiles to be deployed on UK soil. And a former Polish priest became the third member of the anti-Soviet alliance. Pope John Paul II's trip back to his native Warsaw in 1979 galvanized the labor movement as revolution spread throughout Eastern Europe. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, a literal confirmation that the Soviet communist system had crumbled. The policies of glasnost or openness and perestroika restructuring introduced by President Mikhail Gorbachev played their role in destroying the system they were designed to rebuild. Hardline communists took to the streets in a last-ditch effort to save the USSR, but were repulsed by crowds with a controversial figure of Boris Yeltsin in the lead. In a televised address, Mikhail Gorbachev stepped down as Soviet president. The old system collapsed before the new one had time to begin working, he said. And the Soviet flag that had flown over the Kremlin for more than 7 decades was lowered. A month later, the man who had become president took the seat of Russia in the UN Security Council for the first time.
Arab leaders sought what became known as an Arab solution, only to conclude that Saddam Hussein was unwilling to leave Kuwait. Others traveled to Baghdad in a variety of efforts to restore peace and justice. Our Secretary of State, James Baker, held an historic meeting in Geneva, only to be totally rebuffed. This past weekend, in a last-ditch effort, the Secretary General of the United Nations went to the Middle East with peace in his heart, his second such mission, and he came back from Baghdad with no progress at all in getting Saddam Hussein to withdraw from Kuwait. Now, the 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force. We will not fail. As I report to you, air attacks are underway against military targets in Iraq. We are determined to knock out Saddam Hussein's nuclear bomb potential. We will also destroy his chemical weapons facilities. Much of Saddam's artillery and tanks will be destroyed. Our operations are designed to best protect the lives of all the coalition forces by targeting Saddam's vast military arsenal. The war in the Gulf is not a war we wanted. We worked hard to avoid war. For more than 5 months, we, along with the Arab League, the European Community, the United Nations, tried every diplomatic avenue. UN Secretary General Perez de Cuellar, Presidents Gorbachev, Mitterrand, Ozal, Mubarak, and Benjedid, Kings Fahd and Hassan, Prime Ministers Major and Andreotti, just to name a few, all worked for a solution. But time and again, Saddam Hussein flatly rejected the path of diplomacy and peace. The world well knows how this conflict began and when. It began on August 2nd, when Saddam invaded and sacked a small, defenseless neighbor. And I am certain of how it will end. So that peace can prevail, we will prevail.
fire for Light 464. We're taking some pretty heavy flak on Adams about Hobart. There are 3 separate structure fires through the window. Like the PD in that area and some fire companies assigned. We have a fireman shot. We have a fireman shot. We need help immediately. Roger, OCD, we can't beat us out in front of the gurney.
They're dispatching LAPD units along with all fire trucks that respond to major emergency blazes for protection. But with respect to trying to get LAPD service or anything else, folks, you're on your own down there.
There are fires burning, there are people being beaten, there is looting. It is a dangerous night in the city of Los Angeles.
I'm advised that there is someone from the Secretary of State's office on the way over to accept this proclamation of a state of emergency for Los Angeles City and Los Angeles County. This is in response to a request by Mayor Bradley. As a result of the discussions that we have had, there will be as many as 750 California Highway Patrolmen. Additionally, we have made available some 2,000 National Guardsmen. They are on standby, prepared to move. Transport has been arranged, and it is our purpose here at the state government level to restore law and order and to minimize the danger to the residents of the area. This is a matter that needs to be settled in the courts and not in the streets. Thank you.
In New York City, beneath the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, a massive explosion in an underground parking garage. Tens of thousands of people evacuate 2 of the world's tallest buildings.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. Here in New York tonight, authorities are trying to determine what caused the explosion at the World Trade Center, and investigators are looking into the possibility, and it is only a possibility, that it was a bomb. Take a look at the scene now. It's early evening here in New York City. Between the 2 buildings with the lights on are the 110-story towers which dominate the skyline of Lower Manhattan. All the power is off. On the ground tonight, emergency crews from the fire, the police, and other investigative agencies are looking for the cause of the explosion and still in the dark going through the almost 100 floors looking to see if there are any people. The scene earlier, more than 100,000 people either working the building or visiting it on any given day, having to grope their way down and out. At least 5 people were killed and nearly 500 injured. Our first full report is from ABC's Mort Dean.
The underground explosion was so powerful, it rocked even the top floors of one of the Twin Towers.
We were on 96th floor. We were sitting out there doing our work, and all of a sudden we heard a loud bang.
Oh, there was a huge explosion that rocked the building.
Down darkened stairwells, choked with soot and smoke, thousands of workers groped their way to safety. It was a frightening and exhausting experience.
It took like 2 hours to get down. People were passing out, and it was horrible.
But as we went down, the smoke got thicker and thicker in the stairways.
Those who feared they would not make it down to the street instead escaped to the top of the Twin Towers, 110 stories above Lower Manhattan. Some of them were evacuated by helicopter. Many were trapped in elevators or in their offices, and some punched holes through the building's thick glass facade to gulp fresh air or wave SOS signals.
Watch out, watch out, watch out.
The glass beads hit the street like deadly hail. The roof of a commuter train station under the building collapsed. The explosion occurred underground, apparently in a multi-story parking garage.
We are 1 floor below street level in what was a parking garage. This is an example of the tremendous force of the explosion, cars just ripped apart. 3 floors of this garage have collapsed, one on top of the other.
We encountered tremendous fire. We have partial collapse of the floors inside the garage. We've got another victim we found in the garage, brought him out.
Federal officials have been called in to investigate the possibility that it was a bomb that caused the explosion. As more and more people were rushed to hospitals, the rescue and search effort continued. The huge task of going door to door and office to office, while also locating and looking into the more than 200 elevators in the complex that stopped operating when the explosion occurred. Morton Dean, ABC News, New York.
A massive car bomb exploded outside of a large federal building in downtown Oklahoma City, shattering that building, killing children, killing federal employees, military men, and civilians.
The chaos in downtown Oklahoma City did indeed resemble Beirut after what police believe to be a 1,200-pound car bomb ripped through the 9-story federal building shortly after 9 o'clock this morning. More than 500 people were already in their offices, and at least 50 children were in a daycare center on the 2nd floor.
The bombing in Oklahoma City was an attack on innocent children and defenseless citizens. It was an act of cowardice, and it was evil. The United States will not tolerate it, and I will not allow the people of this country to be intimidated.
2 suspects now have been identified, known only as John Doe. They're both about 5'10" to 5'11", about 180 pounds, both with brown hair, one with a crew cut, the other with a tattoo. Those sketches were released as rescue workers worked their way through the wreckage of the Murrah Federal Building, looking for survivors among the close to 200 people believed to be still in that rubble.
Authorities now believe the truck that bore the bomb was parked in a space alongside the federal building. A second vehicle may have been nearby to permit the bombers to escape. The FBI said today it was a huge explosion and that the explosive used was most likely a simple combination of fertilizer and fuel oil.
The indictment charges that Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, former Army buddies with a grudge against the government, planned the bombing, selected the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City as their target, bought and stole materials for the bomb, and built it.
McVeigh is specifically charged with having delivered the bomb to the Murrah Building in a truck that he rented under a false name and having detonated the bomb at the Murrah Building.
I intend to recommend to the Department of Justice and the Attorney General of the United States that the death penalty be sought against both McVeigh and Nichols.
Timothy McVeigh, guilty. Guilty of murder, guilty of conspiracy, guilty on all 11 federal charges that he faced in the Oklahoma City bombing trial. His conviction comes a little more than 2 years after a massive bomb shattered the Murrah Federal Building, killing 168 people, including 19 children. It was the worst terrorist act in American history, and Timothy McVeigh could now be sentenced to death.
This morning, the United States of America carried out the severest sentence for the gravest of crimes. The victims of the Oklahoma City bombing have been given not vengeance, but justice. And one young man met the fate he chose for himself 6 years ago. For the survivors of the crime and for the families of the dead, the pain goes on. Final punishment of the guilty cannot alone bring peace to the innocent. It cannot recover the loss or balance the scales, and it is not meant to do so. Today, every living person who was hurt by the evil done in Oklahoma City can rest in the knowledge that there has been a reckoning.
There was something icky about pursuing this. There was no dignity here from anybody.
Prosecutors emphasize the real issue here is not sex, but the president allegedly subverting the legal system by getting others to lie and obstructing justice.
The evidence suggests that the president repeatedly tried to thwart the legal process in the Jones matter.
The Constitution says that a president can be impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors, but the Constitution does not define what those terms mean. So they're up to Congress to define.
I do not think
that unless these misconduct raises to the level of an assault on our fundamental political system, that they're impeachable, even if every one of them is true.
This was not an impeachable offense. It's very painful, it's very embarrassing. It has nothing to do with the running of the government. There were a number of Republicans who knew that this was all nonsense, but they were going to go along because they were being forced by the party.
History unfolding in the nation's capital today as a somber House of Representatives voted for only the second time in American history to impeach a president of the United States.
After a lifetime of striving for a celebrated rank among American presidents, this diligent student of history was handed his place today, one he did not want but can never give back.
I want the American people to know today that I am still committed to working with people of good faith and goodwill of both parties to do what's best for our country. It's what I've tried to do for 6 years. It's what I intend to do for 2 more, until the last hour of the last day of my term.
It was up to the House to decide whether there was grounds to impeach the president, and then it is up to the Senate to conduct the trial and act as essentially the jury.
The said William Jefferson Clinton be and he hereby is acquitted of the charges in the said articles.
Too close to call.
Too close to call.
On the 7th of November 2000, voters headed to the polls to elect the next president of the United States. Would it be Republican George Bush or Democratic candidate Al Gore? With exit polls unable to determine a clear outcome on election night, it soon became clear that the presidency hinged on the results of one state.
Bush picks up his first state in the South. Gore gets his first win in New England. But no call yet in what both campaigns say may be the key to this election, Florida.
Following the original vote count, Bush was put in the lead, but due to the narrow margin, Florida state law mandated an automatic statewide recount. Bush still came out on top, but his lead was reduced. Florida's Secretary of State declared him the winner, though the Gore campaign took legal action to force recounts in a handful of counties, which they thought could help them overtake Bush's lead. Unreliable mechanical voting machines which punched a hole in the ballot made many voting slips hard to interpret, while in one county the unclear layout of the ballots added to the confusion. A week on from Election Day, Florida's Supreme Court ruled that hand recounts of questionable votes should go ahead in 4 counties. After weeks of legal wrangling to block the recounts, the court ruled that they should continue. The Bush campaign promptly filed suit. A day later, US Supreme Court judges ruled that the recounts must halt, and then on December 12th ruled 5-4 that no recounts could be held in time to meet the federal deadline for the selection of state electors. As a result, George W. Bush was declared the winner of the 2000 US presidential election. Many Democrats were incensed by the Supreme Court's ruling, pointing to the fact that a majority of the judges were considered to be conservative and therefore in favor of Bush.
It's a scandal.
Yes, I think it's over, but I think partisan decision.